As we know, I love to yippee yappy yabba. And honestly, I was going through a few ideas. And I was kind of rocking back and forth between them, and I just really didn't know what I wanted to talk about. And I had eventually talked to one of my friends, Marco, which, thank you, by the way, Marco. Shout out Marco. It's a goat right there. He helped me, basically pushed me into actually finishing this and writing it and doing it. And I just was not having it, honestly, because I didn't know what I wanted to pick, and I didn't know how I was going to set it up. And honestly, introductions and conclusions are probably the hardest thing for me to do. So, to start this video off, I'm gonna say we all make mistakes, and that's okay. Maybe you accidentally cut your hair too short, or picked up the wrong type of bread, or propagated a procedure that did literally nothing to help the people you were doing it on, as one does. And while I was trying to pick something to talk about and to deep dive into, I kind of said that to myself. I said, we all make mistakes. And I thought about it. We all make mistakes. Mistakes? You know what another word for mistake is? Malpractice. So we're going to talk about my absolute goat of a medical malpractitioner, Mr. John Romulus Brinkley. And if you know me, you know how much I talk about Brinkley. I'm pretty sure I brought him up in my AP Lang essay. And there's just so much to talk about with him. Because he wasn't just a medical malpractitioner of the 20th century. He was so much more than that. And we're going to get into it because I love medical malpractice. Well, I don't love medical malpractice in today's day, but I like seeing how we've evolved from where we were, because it's such a dramatic leap from one medical to another medical. I'm not curing my common cold with Coke anymore, and I think that's devastating. I think that's very devastating. But, whatever. So, let's start this out with France's brightest physiologist at the time, Claude Bernard, who at the time was researching and was leading multiple experiments, trying to understand and basically clarify the exact role of the pancreas in digestion. Bernard also proposed the concept of the internal environment, which basically the importance of stability in and around cells. But the reason I bring Bernard up is because his work is so relevant today. So medical research, basically, he wrote this introduction, which was an introduction to medical research specifically. And when he wrote it, a lot of people were very, but it's the fact that he wrote it in 1865, and it took that long to, basically, for medical research to try again with experiments, and it took Bernard, years to do that and write this book? It's crazy. But the reason I bring up Bernard is because Bernard set the stepping stones for the overarching medical advancements in the practice of surgery. So the conclusion that certain diseases came from bacteria that could enter through surgeries came about 20 years before Brinkley was born. However, with all of the innovation came the need for social and political responsiveness. And of course, the need of the common man was top priority, which gives us what I wanted to talk about today, quackery. The need and impulses reached the medical field and gave way to people with limited or no medical schooling or practice to promise things of great velocities. Among those quacks, I give you the head of the snake, Mr. John Romulus Brinkley. And now that we're talking about Brinkley, let's talk about his early life and the way he was brought up. John R. Brinkley, absolutely devastating childhood. He was born July 8th, 1885, in the town of Beta in the rural Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina. Brinkley's parents had both died early in his childhood, and he was raised in a very poor home by his aunt and uncle. And we're going to skip a little bit of his childhood and his teen years, and we're going to go to 1907, where he would be about 22 years old. Brinkley started a medical show, which promoted their homemade tonics, where Mr. and Mrs. Brinkley danced and sung songs after some time on the show. So, I don't know about you, but I would not trust a doctor who is singing songs and dancing on a medical show, trying to sell me tonics to help whatever I'm medically challenged with. It's whatever. After a while on the show, Brinkley moved to Chicago, where he would then attend Bennett Medical College. Due to Brinkley's financial situation, however, he would not be able to pay tuition. Brinkley dropped out, now this is very, very important, without a degree. To avoid debt collectors, Brinkley and his wife moved all around the country, where he also worked with sheep and became increasingly interested in the apparent immunity to human diseases they had. Which, alright, man. At this time, he also decided to marry his second wife, and now this is also very important, without finalizing a divorce from his first wife. And for someone who wants to be a doctor, you'd think he'd have a little more smarts than that, but whatever, bro. Eventually, Brinkley did get his medical degree, and during a time of very poor medical educational standards, Brinkley, Brinkley, had an argument arise upon getting his degree that, quote-unquote, he possessed just as good medical education as many of his contemporaries. And upon his graduation, Brinkley moved to Milford, Kansas with his second wife after seeing an advertisement seeking a family physician. And with Brinkley's arrival in Kansas came the good stuff. The real drama-filled stuff. So, Brinkley was a relatively good physician in around 1917. When the Spanish flu came around, especially when it hit Milford, he was honestly very commendable, and he was a good doctor to his community. However, Brinkley's practice veered towards a different direction. Consulted by an elderly farmer about his and his wife's trouble having another child, Brinkley had the grandest idea of all time, and you'll never guess it. You'll never guess it. Brinkley, having prior perceived ideologies about farm animals, specifically goats and virility, decided to offer the farmer to implant goat testes surgically as a means of restoring his virility. After the procedure, the farmer was apparently thrilled with the results of the surgery, which in turn brought a second patient into Brinkley's care, Mr. William Stitworth, who requested the goat gland procedure on himself as well as implantation of goat ovaries in his wife, and to my complete and utter joy, named the child a year later, Billy. Brinkley then performed several other procedures, and in the height of his quackery, was making around $750, which in today's currency equates to 10 grand per procedure. And with news of Brinkley's miracle procedure getting out, he faced extreme fame among huge newspaper companies at the time, which wrote about the perceived miracle he was working. Brinkley, with his newfound fame, then built a hospital in Milford. I just shoved a lot of Brinkley facts at you. So, like I kind of did in the beginning, I'm going to explain a little bit about the time, just because it is weird to us now, does not mean it was weird back then. Especially xenotransplantation, which is the transplantation, implantation, or infusion of living cells, tissues, or organs from a non-human animal into a human, which again wasn't an absurd or new practice. In fact, many of the time's biggest physicians believed animal tissues and blood could successfully be transplanted into humans. And in the early 19th century, French surgeon Serge Voronoff is probably the best example I have of this. He was famous for his experiments with apes and transplants. But back to Brinkley. In 1922, our favorite doctor decided to share with the world a book devoted to his procedures. And lucky for you all, I have read this book. And I've picked out my favorite line to read for you all. Are you guys ready? Because I'm definitely ready. I have a scheme up my sleeve and the whole world will hear of it. And oh, don't you worry. There's more Brinkley quotes to come. Brinkley, being the man he is, oh dear Brinkley, made a little trip to California, which resulted not with his quackery, but in fact the power of mass communication, which this is where it takes a turn, and I kind of emphasize the fact that Brinkley was not just a medical malpractitioner. Brinkley, in 1923, founded his own radio station in Milford called the KFKB, which then became the most popular station in America, which is attributed to Brinkley's abilities to programming, and honestly, it's genuinely shocking how smart this man was, because the station's program was actually extremely volatile in what you'd see on the station. It featured country, poetry readings, gospel preachings, comedy, and so much more. But rural folks were attracted not only to the variety in the station, but the daily 2 medical talks, where Brinkley himself talked about health procedures, promoting his hospital, and questions. But when the questions started rolling around, they were very controversial. Some questions were about sexuality, which was an extremely daring move during this era, which led to his followers flocking to his hospital and giving their trust to Brinkley because he was so open and willing to talk about something most people weren't. However, as we've seen time and time before, as Brinkley's fame increased, so did the scrutiny surrounding his practice. Heightened attention to the lax bar of medical schools in America, including Brinkley's alma mater, accused schools of selling degrees based on minimal attendance. The same year, California tried to arrest Brinkley for practicing medicine without a standard medical degree. And, like I said before, it's another Brinkley quote time. This was said specifically after California revoked his medical license. The harder they hit me, the higher I bounce. And the higher he definitely went. Well, the Kansas governor, being friends with the Brinkleys, refused to extradite him. Journalists, however, did not care, and wrote to their heart's deepest desires, publishing stories about the rubbish Brinkley was doing in procedures, and got interviews from the people he was giving procedures to who were not happy with the results. In 1930, Brinkley was finally brought before the Kansas Medical Board on 11 charges, including misrepresentation of his educational credentials and improper prescriptions of treatments over the radio without examining patients or subjecting them to proper laboratory testings. In September of 1930, the board revoked Brinkley's Kansas medical license for gross immorality and unprofessional conduct. Separately but nearly simultaneously, KFKB's radio license was revoked, forcing the station off the air in February 1931. However, this was obviously not the end of Brinkley's career. And 5 days after the medical board revoked his license, he announced his candidacy for the position as an independent write-in candidate for Kansas governor. He ran on a really good platform, at least I think. He ran on the platform which was fearlessness, independence, and sympathy for the masses, which was geared towards people who were unhappy with the economic turnout and inevitability of the Great Depression, which, again, I really do like and had some pretty good morals. He basically campaigned almost the same as the New Deal that Roosevelt came with. He campaigned for child labor laws, free health care for the poor, as well as pensions for the elderly and disabled. And in my very humble opinion, I think, honestly, Brinkley would have been an amazing candidate if he was not a medical malpractitioner. If he would have genuinely just started with politics, I think he would have been on a better road than he was. Anyways, in the midst of the campaign, Kansas Attorney General announced that for Brinkley to be a write-in candidate, people had to specifically write J.R. Brinkley instead of John R. Brinkley, John Romulus Brinkley, which ended up dismissing 50,000 votes for Brinkley. Those 50,000 votes could have gotten him second place in candidacy, and he could have won the race. But whatever. And as one loses his radio station medical license and campaign, Brinkley moved to Mexico and built a new radio station, XER, in Villa, across the Rio Grande in Del Rio, Texas. In late 1932, he moved to Texas to be closer to his station and used the Texas medical license he still held. And Brinkley, oh, our sweet Brinkley, decided to focus his medical license now on the prostate. Brinkley quotes again. However, this one specifically is just what he called the prostate that I thought was really funny when I was doing research for this. He called it the troublesome old cocklebur, and it's I just thought it was a great addition to our sweet old Brinkley here. He gave up the implantation of goat testes for a procedure similar to a unilateral vasectomy, which he claimed cured prostate problems. Sure, bro, sure. The procedure was accompanied by a series of 6 post-operative injections of a compound called Formula 1020, which, on analysis, was found out to be nothing more than a dilute solution of blue dye in water. Morris Fishburne, oh my gosh, this freaking guy. He was a journalist and reporter who hated Brinkley. Just was not happy with him at all. And later, Fishburne will be a problem. Morris Fishburne described the manufacture of Formula 1020 as raking a body of water like Lake Erie, coloring it with a dash of blue, and then selling the stuff at 100 for 6 samples. That's lovely, lovely stuff. In 1938, Brinkley moved again, and this time to Arkansas, a state known for a particularly lenient medical licensing board. While in Arkansas, Fishburne decided he was going to sue over medical malpractice, and Brinkley then had to pay $3 million because of this. Brinkley then returned to Del Rio, where his financial woes and lawsuits continued to mount. His Mexican radio station was confiscated by the government, and in February 1941, he declared bankruptcy. In September 1941, a grand jury in Little Rock indicted Brinkley, his wife, and 6 associates on mail fraud charges, for which his wife and associates pled no contest. Brinkley's trial was postponed due to ill health. His health rapidly declined thereafter. He died on May 26, 1942, never having been held legally accountable for his actions, in spite of amassing a fortune during over 2 decades as a quack, which is baffling. But, I mean, it just goes to show that there was so much lenience in how much you could get away with medical malpractice. I mean, we have all over the world, and all over the nation, really, that you had so many people just with barely any medical anything. Like, Brinkley at first had dropped out of medical school and was still practicing medicine without a degree. And then he got his medical degree, and he was still practicing the same as he was before. And it's just difficult. And I mean, Brinkley really pushed radio stations because during this time they weren't very common, and for his to be so successful in both Mexico, California, and in Kansas, it's incredible. I mean, he set the basis up for a lot of radio stations, and that alone I think he should get praise for. But also, he was running for governor, and he was doing good for his community. He built a hospital, yes, in his name for his procedures, but it wasn't just for his procedures. It was just a hospital for everyone. And I think that's commendable too. What's not commendable is the medical malpractice he was committing. I mean, you are actively ruining someone's body with animal intestines and organs, and I don't even know. But anyways, thank you guys for listening and going on this amazing Brinkley adventure with me.